Ben Bradley.
Thank you, Sir George. Your chairmanship, and congratulations to my honourable friend, the member for Gedling, for bringing forward this important debate. I echo his words on the fourth Trent crossing. I know he's a keen campaigner on this issue and has been lobbying hard for several years now to try and bring forward this idea, which he and I have discussed as the leader of the council, and is truthfully well beyond our local budgets. But I would very much welcome the opportunity to work with government and bring forward a business case in the way that he has described. Welcome also to my honourable friend, the Minister, who in the short seconds in our conversation before she sat down, I've already decided is a breath of fresh air, Sir George, and I hope that will continue. As my colleagues have touched on, I'm the leader of the local transport authority, so I'm pleased to have the opportunity to bang on at length about those issues. I think I've got about an hour left to go through it all. But I wanted to start with the very, very local. There are a couple of issues I wanted to raise that are Mansfield specific with the Minister. The first is the Robin Hood line. And my honourable friend, the member for Sherwood, and I have been banging on about this now in our various capacities over about 12 years. And we've made a lot of progress. It's inched forward significantly, but it has inched. And although we've had a commitment for a long time, progress is slow. It was finally announced in the Integrated Rail Plan most recently as part of the connections around Nottinghamshire and Towton, which are hugely important. And there's now further potential to link the existing Robin Hood line, which is still there, still in place, it just needs upgrading, to projects like Step Fusion in the north of the county, and the opportunity to bring in billions of investment, jobs and growth, and link all of that together. It's something we can improve on and we can take local control of through our devolution deal. But any opportunity to accelerate that, any opportunity to bring forward what is a smaller and perhaps less widely strategically vital project for the county and the region, but is hugely important to local communities who just want to access work and leisure opportunities that they can't at the minute without a car, and many can't afford a car in those areas. It's hugely important to us, and I'd welcome any opportunity to accelerate that project. The second is the Sainsbury junction, as it's known locally, on the A60 in Mansfield. Frustratingly, I actually secured the funding to fix it. We worked very hard prior to the pandemic to come up with a workable plan that we thought would improve the situation, where the district council helpfully put about 20 different businesses, including 2 supermarkets, into a retail site with one entrance and exit onto a busy trunk road, and people can queue for 40, 50 minutes, an hour at Christmas to get out of it. And we came up with a plan, and we submitted it to the government's Pinch Point Fund, and promptly were told we would get the money the day before the pandemic hit. And the money was promptly, and quite understandably, reprioritised to other things. But the plan is there, and the money was there, and if we could get the money, we'd crack on and do it. And that's hugely important to my constituents. So I wonder whether the Minister knows whether those kinds of pinch point type funding opportunities are likely to be revisited. And the final one, a positive one, is significant upgrades to the A614 that are starting this year, which is the spine road up through the north of Nottinghamshire and allows many of my constituents to get out to work. We're very keen to deliver that and to accelerate the outcomes and the growth that it unlocks around those communities. Won't be surprised that inflationary pressures will have an impact on that. I wonder whether government is minded to support with inflationary pressures around projects like that. But the good news is that work will commence later this year. Beyond Mansfield then, and into the county, and my colleagues have touched on the 2 issues that I will raise. One is highways maintenance. Good quality highway network is absolutely key for residents in Nottinghamshire. It's always the #1 thing that comes up in county council elections, that comes up in surveys when we go into our budget survey later this year. I imagine it will be the #1 thing that people will raise. It usually is. Not least because although our care services are absolutely vital and important, they touch only a very small proportion of our residents, whereas everybody uses the roads. We undertook, as has been mentioned, a massive review earlier in the end of last year, probably 12 months or so ago now. We finished it, which resulted in 50 different actions we were going to take forward, including a longer-term programme of works, including on improving the way we repair local roads, particularly residential roads, and moving to a kind of right first-time approach where we'll do this long-term repair that is more expensive but will last and will deliver the quality that residents expect to see instead of temporary repairs wherever we can. And we're also working hard to communicate better with residents to make sure that they understand what it is we're doing on their street and why, and how long it will take in advance of it happening, which perhaps has been lacking before. So I'm pleased we've been able to do that, and we've also invested an additional £12 million over the next 4 years on top of the £18.5 million DFT funding, annual funding, to start to tackle the historic backlog of repairs, which truthfully runs into some £150 million worth of repairs. If you can find that down the back of the sofa, Minister, I can get all of that sorted, but it is a challenge. And dare I say, is what happens when you have 32 years of Labour leadership in the last 40 within the county. I knew you'd enjoy that over there. I have to do it. You know I have to do it. The changes that we have introduced and are starting to make a real difference to residents on the ground, and we've reduced the number of those temporary repairs that everybody hates to see by nearly 60%, whilst at the same time doubling the number of high-quality repairs, the number of square metres of high-quality repair that we've been able to do over the last 12 months. Now, those outcomes are great, but we've got thousands of miles of roads to cover, so that's a really long-term project, but we are making good progress. And I welcome the announcement that the pothole funding element of the DFT funds will continue into next year. I hope we'll get a good share of that to be able to tackle that backlog and continue to deliver this work. Wider transport then, and buses. Often forgotten about how important they are, not just to the local economy in terms of jobs and industry and supply chain, but how they connect people to health and leisure opportunities, how they support my constituents to tackle health inequalities, to have better lifestyles. And that is hugely important to all of us. I had a relatively good bus network pre-COVID around the county with high levels of satisfaction. The county council consistently rated in the top 3 upper tier authorities in the country. And we annually invest over £4 million into the provision of bus services that supports 80 services that used to carry pre-COVID nearly 2 million people. The commercial sector wouldn't provide those services, and we have worked really hard to continue to sustain them, as well as lots of new infrastructure. And in addition to this year, we've also provided further temporary support for another 20 services to help with that bus recovery. Truthfully, that's the thin line that's preventing those services from being withdrawn, because they aren't commercially viable as it stands. But as with many parts of the country, increasingly there are a number of challenges for bus companies and the provision of these services, including inflationary costs, including driver shortages, and passenger confidence has taken a massive hit in the way that my honourable friend from Rushcliffe has described, because quite simply it's increasingly difficult for bus companies to be able to show up on time or even at all and deliver a service. Every day now we get a daily report from my constituency of all the different bus routes that have been cancelled that day. At less than that day's notice. And that makes it incredibly difficult for people to be able to get around and get to work in particular. So local bus companies have undertaken big recruitment campaigns, lots of new drivers being trained, and hopefully we'll get there in time. But it is a huge concern, and the viability of those routes is a huge concern. I welcome the government support for the sector, and we've been able to prop up some of those services because of that government support. And we're also trialling on-demand responsive transport, which has to be part of the future of these networks to make them sustainable. So we're not running empty buses around fixed routes all the time. And we've been able to pilot that as a result of the National Bus Strategy Rural Mobility Fund, and that seems to be going really well, to the point where those residents who sit just outside of the pilot areas are asking me when they can get access to these new services, which is really good news. We've also indicatively been allocated £30 million of the bus service improvement plan, which I'm grateful for. The truth is many fixed route services are not likely to be viable in the future if the trends continue. There's going to be some really common sense. I've actually written a very long letter to the Secretary of State for DLUC, laying out a number of ways that we could use local money that already exists more flexibly, rather than have to splash the cash on lots of things, but we could certainly make it simpler for ourselves. The final thing I want to touch on is the kind of macro bit, the regional bit, which is where the good stuff is happening, and it speaks to what my the Honourable Member for Nottingham South said earlier on about the commitment to get these things done, and that's the devolution deal that we've just secured this summer, which is massively meaningful because it gives us local control over delivery of lots of these projects. As my honourable friend from Gedling touched on earlier, the figures around the investment in the region make start reading, both in terms of transport and wider public spending and private sector spending as well. And even just for the year 2020 to 21, if we were to have the average level of national funding, that would be an additional £1 billion into our region to support those services. So it is really meaningful, which is why I'm so pleased that we've been able to secure what I think is the largest gain share investment fund in any devolution deal anywhere in the country ever, which is brilliant, worth just over £1.1 billion to our area, with a further transport pot yet to be determined. And in the West Midlands recently, they got another £1 billion on top of that to invest in their local transport, which would be absolutely fantastic. So I'm really grateful actually to the honourable member for right honourable friend for Welwyn Hatfield when he was Secretary of State for signing off that commitment and making that commitment to Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire and to the East Midlands. But it gives us the opportunity to do all sorts of really good things, to join up ticketing across the network on all types of service. So you should be able to get from Arnold or from West Bridgeford to the Peak District on one ticket across bus, train and tram with one day rate in a really simple and joined up way in the future. And that will be hugely meaningful and impactful to local residents. To be able to lay out those key routes around employment in particular and fill the gaps on that key route network, to be able to link up our transport systems to the sites of future jobs and investment. So I mentioned Step Fusion earlier on, where we've got a £20 billion investment. We can not only build the skills pipelines and support that industry, but also connect people into work from the surrounding villages and towns and make sure that everybody has access to those opportunities. And also to accelerate long-awaited projects like the Robin Hood line and the Maid Marian line. If I take the Towton site as an example, which I know the Minister knows well, it's the site of significant jobs and investment in coming years. It's been in the integrated rail plan, new station investment, all sorts of commercial and housing investment going on there. We need a link road, which we put in a Levelling Up Fund bid for, and I hope government will look favourably on. But then we have the ability to install that road network, that public transport network, to deliver projects like the Maid Marian line that connects surrounding towns and villages into Towton. And we're going to have that in our local control. And I think for the first time, that is hugely important and meaningful and tackles perhaps some of the concerns, as I say, that the Honourable Member for Nottingham South laid out earlier on. We will have responsibility for the wider area transport plan by March 2024. Clearly being able to build a joined-up strategy across the whole area is really important, because it means, as I say, that residents living in Broxtowe or Mansfield, Nashfield, who actually may just as well go into Derbyshire as they do into Nottinghamshire to travel for work and leisure, can have a joined-up system that actually works and connects them to the places they get to, not constrained by boundaries. I will give way.
Thank you for giving way. I actually agree with many of the points that he's been making. But if the region is to be successful in planning for the future and in developing the transport network that we need in Nottinghamshire and indeed those links across to Derbyshire and other parts of the East Midlands region, don't we need certainty from government about investment in the future? As he will know, we spent a great deal of time planning around an HS2 station at Towton, only for it to move to East Midlands Parkway, and wouldn't certainty about both the timescale and locations enable us to do a better job in the region?
Thank you for that intervention. And as my other friend from Gedling said, she knows the area incredibly well and knows the transport issues incredibly well from her own experience. She's right, of course, that certainty would be hugely helpful. And she pointed to Maid Marian to the Midland Main Line, where we perhaps haven't had that in the past. I was really pleased to see that as one of those accelerated projects in the recent budget announcement, which I'm really grateful for. But I think what this devolution deal gives us is that certainty that we know we're going to have that funding over the next 30 years, and we know it's going to be within our local control to deliver some of these projects. We've actually been given the overall control over the integrated rail plan, which means that those HS2 stations, what we build around them, the transport connectivity to join it all together, is for the first time within our local gift, instead of relying on government to do that, which I think is a good thing. It means we can focus on our local priorities. So I totally understand and get what the Honourable Lady's saying. I think there are some answers in this devolution settlement that can help us to achieve it. As I say, we'll also have that integrated rail plan and HS2 element of it. So there's huge growth potential in that. And if we can get that right, what that means for investment and jobs and opportunities in our area is really meaningful. So I'm quite excited about that. I'd welcome a conversation with the Rail Minister about the options and that certainty around HS2, because so far we've got to Parkway and Nottingham and Derby, and then the Sheffield to Leeds, and a bit in the middle, there's still some options on the table. I have a view as to what those options should be, as I know many colleagues, Midlands Connect and others will have, but it's uncertain on the timescales as yet as to make that decision. So I'd welcome a chance to have that conversation. So to summarise then, Sir George, There are significant challenges on a local level where we need support to maintain networks, not least bus networks in the short term, to improve highways and help our communities. But I really welcome the long-term opportunities that come from that devolution settlement to deliver more investment growth, to improve our transport links and to have more local say over how all of that works. I hope the Minister can take away the requirement to ensure that those two things are joined up, that we're able to sustain and protect local services now, whilst we put together those plans and strategies over the next 18 months in advance of our devolution deal coming into force, so that those things aren't lost, so we don't end up with a big gap in the middle. If the Department for Transport and wider government can help us to overcome those challenges, and I think the future in terms of investment and transport links for our area is actually really bright.